We are in the last week on our interactive study on the book of Revelation. I'm kind of filled with mixed emotions. Part of me is glad that we're almost done, but most of me is sad because I've thoroughly enjoyed this book. As we try to wind things down, we're going to start with Revelation chapter 20, which just happens to be the most passionately contested chapter in the entire Bible. It's super ironic to me that the millennial kingdom, which is supposed to describe the 1,000 years of peace, for Christians, what we end up doing is we spend all of our time fighting about it. Some believe it's a literal sequence of events that starts with Jesus' return, followed by a 1,000-year reign. Then it's followed by the release of Satan and a final judgment. Others just as passionately believe that the 1,000 years is symbolic, both of Jesus and his followers' present victory and their future return from different angles. I don't want us to get fixated on the details, so what I've done is I've given you on the website a chart that talks about the different views and lays it out so you can look at the chronological sequence and what people believe. But today, what I want to focus on is the main point. When Jesus returns and he's the long-awaited king, he will fully and finally deal with evil and remove everything and everyone that destroyed his world and devastates his people. He will vindicate his followers by empowering them to rule as priests. What most of us don't realize is that in the Bible, when it was written, there were no verses, there were no chapters, so they run all together. So as we're finishing up chapter 19 last week, we saw Jesus return and he threw the false prophet and the Antichrist into a pit. Then in verse 20, John sees something else because it's kind of the culmination of evil where God is eliminating it from the earth. And I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the keys to the abyss and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil, Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And what is so interesting to me is there is no fight. It isn't between God and Satan. In fact, one angel comes down, seizes him, and throws him into a pit. Then we read about a 1,000-year reign and what takes place on that. And I'm going to give you the chart, so we're going to skip some of that here. We're going to move on to verse 11. Because I think this is the most important part. It is also ironic to me that we spend all of our time arguing about what the 1,000 years is, and we miss out on what is essential and what is important. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from its presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. This is so interesting. The books were opened. Another book was opened, which was the book of life. So there's two books opened. One is the deeds that everyone's done, and the other one is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done. Everyone gets judged according to what you have done. And just so we know, if you get judged according to what you've done, it doesn't end well for you. The only chance we have is to be written in the Lamb's book of life. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. And each person was judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name is not found written in the book of life or the Lamb's book of life will be thrown into the fire of hell. Those are terrifying words, but what I don't want us to miss out on is that every single person will be held accountable. You can either be held accountable for your own actions, or you can be held accountable by allowing the Lamb and what he did on the sacrifice on the Christ to stand for you. And if you choose to go with yourself and your own actions, let's just say it doesn't end well. Now, as we move forward to Revelation chapter 21, these are some of the most passionate and some of the verses in the Bible that just motivate me. Before we get there, I want to read from two short passages. One is David, because David had a compelling vision of the future that was able to give him the courage to live into the present. He says this, Lord, in Psalm chapter 16, verse 5, Lord, you alone are my portion, my cup. You make me secure. The boundary lines have fallen me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. He's looking forward to something incredible. I will praise the Lord who counsels me even at night, and he instructs my heart. I keep always my eyes open, Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. He's going to have the courage to be able to live in the present. Therefore, my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also rests secure because you will not abandon me into the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful servant see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You fill me with joy. Watch this. In your presence. David understood that the place to get joy was to be filled in God's presence with eternal pleasures at your right hand. Paul says it slightly different, but he says very similar thing. He says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has even imagined what God has in store for those who love him. We find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. Now, in Revelation chapter 21, it gives an incredible description of what we have to look forward in the future. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. Some people get caught up on this and they think we're not going to have oceans in there. And when it's talking about the sea, that's the place of the abyss. That's the place of chaos. That's the place where evil exists. We'll get to talking about that in a little bit. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from heaven from God, prepared as a beautiful bride dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, and here's the crucial part, the part that we don't want to miss. God's dwelling place is now among his people. The central important factor about what heaven is that God will be present there. God's dwelling place is now among his people, and he will dwell with them, or literally, he will tabernacle with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning, crying, pain, for the old order of things will be passed away. God is going to make everything new. Verse 5. He was seated on the throne said, this is interesting because throughout the book of Revelation, except for at the very beginning, God is sitting on the throne, but he doesn't actually say anything. Here at the end in chapter 21, God speaks because he wants to make sure everyone catches the central importance of what he's trying to communicate. He was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write these things down, for they are trustworthy and true. What I'm about to say is so profound, it changes everything, and you have to pay attention to this. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the springs of the water of life. Or in essence, he's saying, I will give you the fulfillment of all of your deepest longings, and it won't cost you anything because the Lamb has already provided the way for you. And I will be their God. This is the fourth time in this short passage we've got to see that he says, I will be with you. I will be their God, and they will be my children. It's interesting to me throughout these 3 chapters, there's 5 different times where it talks about the people who will not get to go in. There are 4 major images that are really important to see. The first image is the temple. We're going to take some time to focus on what that is. The second image is the bride, which has to do with describing God's people. Then we get to see the people, or we get to see the city, that is the place where God is going to bring everything to fruition. And then we get to see the garden, which has to do with how God is going to fulfill his purpose. But what I want us to catch is that in all 5 of those lists, it describes who's on the outside of the city, or who's not the bride, or who doesn't get to experience the temple. And it talks about things that he's been talking about all along. Watch this. But the cowardly, those are the people that give in to their fears. Those are the people that are not willing to hold fast. The unbelieving, he talks about the vile, the murderers, the immoral, the magic arts, idolaters, and he says those are the ones that don't get to come in. But the thing that's interesting is the cowards, the people who are afraid, the people who shrink back, the people who do not believe, because that's the purpose of Revelation, is to give us the courage to live into the present so we get to experience the future that God has for us. The last one he says, and all liars. And the only one that makes it into all 5 of those lists is liars. So I think we might want to pay attention to talk about the truth. They will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur, which is the second death. If I had more time, I'd develop the second death. First death is when we die in this body. The second death is only for those who get what they wanted all along, which is life without God's presence. Now, when people think of heaven, they often miss out on the most important part. They read about streets of gold, breathtaking structures. They focus their attention on the wrong things. God is not trying to compete with the materialistic notions and the amenities of this world. The reward of our salvation is not that we don't have to work and we get to live in unbelievable luxury. All of history is working towards God's plan, where God's people get to be in God's place and they get to accomplish God's purposes. God does not throw away the earth and start over. He brings to fruition everything he has been working towards all along. The story starts in Genesis and works all the way through to the end of the book in Revelation. And by the way, everything that God plans in the beginning comes to its ultimate fruition in the book of Revelation. And there will be no more sin, no more sorrow, no more cancer. Relationships will be perfect. Broken relationships will be a thing of the past, and God will restore his people, and everything will work just the way God intended it. God sees heaven as the fulfillment of every dream of the entire Bible. We will not have to live in painful disconnection and separations. We will not have to have the agony that comes from arguments that don't come to resolution, because there we will get along with God and each other. All of history is working towards God's plans, where God's people are in his place, accomplishing his purposes. We get to reign as kings and priests in our resurrected bodies. Now, as we move forward to Revelation chapter 21, verse 9, we read these words. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and said to me, "Come, and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." That's one of the images I was talking about. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from heaven. And it's interesting, heaven's not going to be up there. It's going to come down to earth after God makes everything new. And it shone, and this is something I want us to capture, with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like jasper, clear and crystal. It had a great high wall and 12 gates, and with the 12 angles of the gates. And the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes, and there were 12 gates on the east. They were on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west. And what it's letting people know is that people are going to be able to enter it from all different sides. And this number 12 is very significant in this passage. There's 12 foundations, and on them are the 12 names of the apostles of the Lamb. The angel who talked with me in the measuring rod gave a golden measure of the city and its gates and its walls. The city was laid out like a square. And in order for us to understand this, we have to understand the story of the Bible. At the very beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth, and then he creates people, and he says everything is good, but then people choose their own path and they rebel. And most people read the story of Genesis because they start there, and then they get into Exodus, and Exodus starts with things that are very complicated. There are so many rules and regulations that you miss out on the most important part. By the time you get to chapter 24 on, it talks about one central theme, that ultimately God wants to be present with his people, and he will work that out towards fruition. I want you to notice something about that's significant of this description. The only 2 other places in the entire Bible that fit the description of this perfect symmetrical cube. The first is the tabernacle, the second is the temple. Both of them had the holy place. If you read 1 Kings 19:20, when Solomon built the temple, he prepared the inner sanctuary. It was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, 20 high, or 30 feet long, 30 feet wide, 30 feet high. It overlaid the inner with pure gold, and he also laid it with cedar. Its sides and its height were completely equal. The New Jerusalem is modeled after the most holy place. See, here in heaven, there will not be a temple because there won't be any need for it. I love as we keep going down and we continue to read what takes place here in verse 22. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God and its light, and the Lamb is its light. I want to read that again. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and the Lamb is its temple. In the ancient cities, they were dark. They didn't have lighting systems, so they depended on light torches or the light from the sun by day and the night by the moon. How different it will be in the New Jerusalem. It enjoys glorious light all the time as God and the Lamb provide it. The residents of the New Jerusalem will never receive an electric bill or experience a blackout. Light will come from God's glory. Neither the moon nor the sun is needed to shine in the Jerusalem, because Jesus, who is the light of the world, serves as the sinless Lamb. 6 times in this portion of Revelation, it talks about the importance of the Lamb. And as we talked about throughout this study, how important the Lamb is, and what the Lamb does is it provides the sacrifice to make it possible for people to get to experience God's presence. It makes it possible for people to be able to see God face to face. In the Old Testament times, the Shekinah glory of God shone only at various times. And when it appeared, it was amazing, and it just blew everyone's mind. Remember when Saul of Tarsus was on the road to Damascus, and a bright light accompanied Jesus' appearance, and it completely blinded Saul? Acts chapter 9, 3-9. The Apostle John wrote in 1 John 1:5 that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. The centerpiece in the city is the Lamb that made it possible to experience God's presence. I don't want us to miss this, okay? It isn't about having great mansions. What it's about is that God himself will be present there, and we get the incredible privilege of experiencing his presence. What makes heaven so incredible is that God is dwelling with his people. You see, God made us and he created us, and he knows who we are and what we need to be fulfilled in every single one of our longings. And ultimately, all that the Bible talks about will come to complete fruition when the heavenly city comes down, because God is there. Oh, I can't even describe how unimaginably cool that's going to be. What makes Revelation so unique is that's not where the story ends. As you continue to read through the rest of the chapter, there's 16 more verses after heaven is described. And the reason I am convinced that there's 16 more verses is because 8 of them call us to action. In fact, if you did the homework this week, I gave you an assignment, and the assignment I gave you was to take the 7 blessings in the book of Revelation and then paraphrase them yourself so that you can see how that is lived out. I'm going to try to take some time just to do a couple of those. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of the prophecy. Blessed are those who hear it, take it to heart. The only people that get to receive the benefits of the book of Revelation are the ones that receive it into their heart and they actually do what it says. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying, this is the second blessing, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, for they will be able to rest in their labor. You see, Revelation says that you may die, and it might cost your life to follow Jesus, but it will be worth it. The third blessing in chapter 16 says, look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed. You see, the book of Revelation isn't so that we can have a chronological timeline of how the end of the earth pans out so that we can know every single intricate detail. It's about a book that challenges us with this incredible vision of what the future holds so that we can live it out in the present. The fourth blessing, then the angel said to me, blessed are those who are invited to the wedding. And as you read through the rest of Revelation, it talks about 2 things. It warns us one last time about the impending judgment if you decide to live for this world like the inhabitants of the earth did. But it also invites you to experience an incredible blessing for which you were born for. The book of Revelation invites you to drink from the eternal water. If I had time, I'd talk about the garden, which was that last image when you come, which is going to be in the city. In fact, I'm going to take one more minute so that I can just describe this so that you can kind of see it. In chapter 22, verse 1, watch this. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life. And if you go back to the Garden of Eden and we read the first 2 chapters of Genesis, it talks about this incredible garden that God created. And we see this river that flows out to 4 rivers that feed and make sure everything gets nourished. Flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb down the middle of the great city, on the side of the river stood the tree of life. And in the garden in Genesis, there's this tree of life. But the people there, Adam and Eve, did not get to experience the tree of life. In fact, because they had rebelled against God, if they would have eaten of that tree in their present state, being unredeemed, they would have been throughout all eternity in misery. Watch what happens. And the leaves of the tree were the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. For the throne of the God of the Lamb and his servants will serve him there. They will see him. They will see his face. And his name will be on their forehead, and there will be no more night, and they will not need the light of the lamp of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign with him forever. Thank you for joining us in this journey throughout the book of Revelation. I'm glad you joined me, and I want to leave you with one last encouragement. Don't miss what God has for you. If you decide to live for this world, unfortunately, you will be held accountable. But there is an invitation to the thirsty so that you can experience what your heart's desire is for, which is God himself. Thank you for joining us. What a privilege it's been to talk through the book of Revelation.